So I am Miriam, and I am the owner-operator of Wild Child Native Gardens. I work as a garden coach. Thank you, Pam, for introducing me. Today, I'm going to share with you the second half of the program that we presented here this spring about traditional seed sowing. But today we're going to be talking about advanced gardening techniques. And for all of you that are new here, that program was really about starting seeds successfully. This program entails different ways you can successfully grow your garden should you wish to try. Because gardening is a life skill and one that anyone can acquire, even a beginner, people come to gardening by way of a relative, a neighbor, or curiosity. Sometimes grief brings people to a garden or to the soil, or the planting of a garden happens to signify a birth or a death. Occasionally, economics is a driver as families move to grow their own food or support the community that they live in with a victory garden. Once we get a taste of the satisfaction of getting our hands in the soil or the pleasure of watching something we've tended to grow from seed to fruit, we come back to it season after season. If you're here today, you already know that gardening has a myriad of benefits for your health and your wellness. But there are interesting and advanced gardening techniques you're here to learn about that you might want to incorporate into what you're already doing, and that might help you do more of what you're doing and have more fun with the gardening that you're already doing. So that's what I'm here to tell you about today. My favorite quote that I will share with you all today comes from Marcus Cicero. And it is, if you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need. And I think that that is very true for me. Let me just say, this is the foundation of gardening, really. No one needs to become a master gardener or go get certifications or degrees to understand gardening or ecology. Passion and drive for knowledge is really all that you need. As long as we have libraries and willing neighbors to share information, volunteer opportunities to get your hands into the soil, you can grow wisdom and help others to do the same. Our backyards are places that we find respite in, places we flee to when we need solitude or want to enjoy the natural world. How we behave and interact in this space and the relationship we have with it is one with some responsibility, especially now. So today, with these advanced gardening techniques, I'm going to reintroduce restoring ecosystems with natives, but only briefly. I'm going to talk about lasagna gardening, square foot gardening, companion planting, integrated pest management. Both companion planting and integrated pest management are part of square foot gardening, but integrated pest management is also part of permaculture. I'm going to talk about straw bale gardenings. And then we're going to touch into permaculture, which is a huge topic and something that I suggest you delve into if you're interested in ecology. Today, I'm going to speak about hugelkultur garden beds and food forest systems in that space. And again, talk about integrated pest management there in that space. We're going to be talking about biodynamic gardening and the do less nature-driven gardening, which I think is super important and something that a lot of people need to do more of or do less of. So the definition of ecological horticulture is the system of interactions between the garden and the environment that creates and maintains it. We aren't trying to turn back time, but we can help the flora and fauna that live here now deal with the rapidly changing conditions of the world for the future. Therefore, as this is an advanced gardening technique to incorporate natives into your landscape, remove invasive species, and spend your time and energy learning more about these areas of interest. If you are interested in learning about natives and incorporating them into the landscape, please view the library YouTube channel archive for my most recent program on natives. It is extensive and it goes into great depth about this most important topic that is timely and super important for our ecosystem. To begin, All of what I teach is from the perspective of an organic gardener. But there are always things to learn from the distant past and current farming techniques. Our urban gardens can use some of the best practices from both of these areas as we see fit. Standard farming, or what we call commercial industrial farming, is done in specific ways to benefit the farmer and to benefit the industry. There are certain things that we know. We know that planting is done often in long, skinny rows with 3-foot wide aisles for the wheelbarrow, if they're being done with wheelbarrows still today, usually taking up 80% of the garden space and compacting the tilled soil. We know that the area is all watered, including the rows and the aisles, when plants only utilize 20% of the space. We know that there are weeds using up nutrients in the soil that could be used by flowers or crops. We know that that's a lot of work, back-breaking work, hoeing down those weeds. We know that they're sowing all of their seeds and then thinning those seedlings and discarding the others as waste. And there's very little composting being done in this sort of a situation. And we also know that all the planting is being done at once, with all of the harvest going to market at once, which is practical or impractical for the home and urban gardener, depending on how you look at it. If you want a zillion zucchinis at once, that's how you would do it. Often, but not always, there is a use of chemical fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides in the standard farming practice in an attempt to guarantee a crop to market. And there's a huge and long history around this that I've taught already, and I'm not going to go into it because I could be here all day. If you want to learn about that, please look at my soil class. There's a lot of information all about herbicides and pesticides and their impact on our soil and our water. If we look at traditional agriculture, which is subsistence farming, that goes back all the way into recorded history for humans, we know that there is heavy primitive use of low-tech tools such as the axe, the hoe, and the stick. We also know this information has been passed down verbally from local and indigenous peoples around the world, including spiritual and superstitious beliefs contributing to the making of these agricultural decisions in a lot of places. We know that they utilize methods such as slash and burn and shifting cultivation using organic materials and resources to add organic matter to the land to fertilize it, where nothing is wasted. So the land is being taken care of by organic matter that is redistributed right back into the soil, including byproducts of animal waste and animal byproducts that come from harvesting fish and animal guts and things that aren't being used by people eating and creating goods. So all of that goes back into the land. There's rotation of crops to keep plants producing. There's a use of livestock raising to create fallow land. And with that rotation, that fallow land gets moved around so that the land continues to produce. There's the absence of accountability or actual responsibility to the environment. That really hasn't been on the radar anywhere in the world until the last 20 or 30 years as a big ticket item of, whoa, what's happening? There's dominant production practice use by over half of the world's population. Half of the world's population is still doing traditional agriculture, even though we are in a place where this is not part of our lifestyle. And you wouldn't think about this as the way we live. But if we were to leave where we are and visit over half of the world, this is what we would find. And there is a lack of surplus production. Subsistence farming means making just enough for your family. There are no reasons to make more. People are just making enough for themselves, or maybe just enough to take to market to buy a few extra things for their families. So today, modern Amish farmers in Pennsylvania use many of these traditional farming techniques. That's probably the closest that we can find, some of this traditional agriculture, to turn infertile soil into healthy farmland and gardens. And we can actually learn a lot from them. They use manure from their horses to fertilize, to rotate their crops, and they're careful not to compact the soil by using lightweight equipment and hand-drawn plows. And they harvest delicate heirloom crops by hand. They're connected to their land and pay close attention to their soil, having a much higher percentage of organic material in their fields than neighboring farms, producing high yields. And there have been a lot of studies done comparing the soil of their farms to their neighboring commercial farmers, which has been really interesting to look at from my perspective as a soil lover. Organic matter is the key to soil health and plant nutrition, battling fungal diseases and plant viruses and preventing insect infestation. Of course, the Amish are a varied group, and some farmers do grow non-heirloom crops. The public does have a mistaken impression that all Amish farmers are all 100% organic. They are not, but some do use industrial-style chemical fertilizers and pesticides. So I don't want to misrepresent an entire community here. Urban gardeners are typically short on space, and growing room for a garden is at a premium. So for us urban home gardeners, there are better ways to maximize our space, both horizontally and vertically, and we can learn from both the commercial farmer and the subsistence farmer and use some of their best practices in our gardens as we become advanced gardeners. We can use row covers, just like the farmers do, to keep insects off of our crops and use that as an organic farming technique. With different shades of plastic mulch to warm the soil from beneath the crops and suppress weeds as well. And there are special different colors that help different crops grow better. We can also dig in irrigation piping, which can be very useful to use less water and help the water go the places where we want it to without it turning into vapor, which is helpful. Now, we have a lot of water here, but much of our country is experiencing radical drought. So that's a really important thing to remember. And we just had a huge 3-week drought, which doesn't sound huge, but it is for our area. And we've had many, many places that have lost a lot of species plants because our plants here are used to rain every few days. And I don't know if you've experienced that in your gardens, but many of my clients have, and people have been alarmed by the lack of rain. Thank goodness we had a couple of very big downpours. But when we do have lack of rain, the first place that we notice it is in the trees. And the trees will begin to fall if we have a lack of rain, which happened to us when we were living in Connecticut. We were living in the forest, and there was a lack of snowfall for several years, and the trees started coming down in record numbers. And it was because of lack of snowfall. So drought's really important and something to pay attention to, even if you're not aware of large amounts of rainfall changes. So as far as plastics go, plastics can be useful, especially if you're not burying them, if you're using them as ground cover or for mulches and you reuse them over and over. You try to keep them in good condition, you put them away in the winter and you reuse them. The research on the benefits of plastic-colored mulches is far from complete, so these products are not sold with any guarantees, but they are very useful. Black plastic mulch is said to suppress weeds better than any other plastic mulch, thanks to its opacity, which we could guess at. It also keeps the soil warm during the growing season, raising the soil temperature by up to 5 degrees at a 2-inch depth. That allows you to put your plants out earlier and expect a quicker harvest. But red colored plastic is said to work much better for tomatoes. And in some studies, it yields up to 20% more fruit. And it helps with strawberries. Strawberries grown on red plastic mulch were sweeter and have better fragrance. That's nice to know. And blue mulch are better than black for big harvests if you're planting cantaloupe or summer squash. Cucurbits like cucumbers too. Silver mulch is great at keeping aphids and whiteflies away from your crops and also reduces the population of cucumber beetles. Good to know, some nice tricks and tips. Both brown and green colors of mulch are available in infrared transmitting plastic. This mulch is said to warm up your soil better than plastic mulch in the beginning of the growing season. So that will help your plants grow faster in the beginning and set out nice, strong roots, which is helpful for those early season pests. And it helps with early ripening of the fruits that need more heat, like cantaloupe. So if you're trying to grow things that prefer warmer climates and you're paying attention to what's going on around you, you can try using some of these brown and green mulches to get your fruits to grow a little bit faster and a little bit stronger. Phenology is a great way to get more in touch with the tune of nature. It's the study and observation of natural events and cycles. We all do this, but as you garden, you become more and more aware of what's going on around you. You spend a little bit more time in your garden. Maybe you take a cup of tea in the morning or coffee. You're looking for hummingbirds, or maybe there was a cool beetle you saw walk by yesterday and you want to see if that beetle's come back. You just begin to start paying attention to cycles. You start noticing when the leaves change. You become more in tune with nature. Phenology allows you to observe when plants are blooming, what insects are visiting your specimen plants, when birds migrate, and when specific trees begin their fall coloration. But there's actually a really long history of phenology being used by gardeners, using the patterns of birds to forecast weather, or to note the earlier blooming of lilacs or narcissus as a barometer of climate change and its impact to their region. You can also use phenology to extend your planting season for tender, cool weather crops, or to plant out your cucurbits when the lilac is in full bloom, for instance. Using the blooming times of your later season bulbs is a great way to chart and plant out your nightshade family plants. So you don't always have to go to your almanac to figure out when to plant things. You can look at the earth and say, what is going on and when can I use the timing of the planet, which is changing, to plant what I need, whether it's flowers or bulbs or your fall garlic, whatever is going on around you, you can use your own chart to figure that out. For instance, apple maggot moths peak when Canada thistle blooms. Who knew this? Pretty cool. I looked up what we could learn from phenology and I learned some really neat things. Japanese beetles appear when morning glory starts to grow. We don't want Japanese beetles. They're invasive. They eat grapevine, they eat roses, they ate all of my contorted filbert leaves. They are nasty and invaders, and we don't want them. We want to trap them or kill them. They don't belong here in our ecosystem, but it's actually really helpful to know that if you have a morning glory or some of that nasty invader morning glory that sneaks into your garden beds and it starts to bloom, that's a good time to see those Japanese beetle grubs come out of your garden and start to become beetles, and you can look for them and find them. Crabapple buds means tent caterpillars, and hickory blossoms herald squash vine borers. Cabbage root maggots are present when the wild rocket is in flower, and wild rocket's another name for arugula. So here in this image, I have phenology wheels, and phenology wheels are just a simple way to document your observations in one spot. This is kind of a fun hobby, but it's also something that goes way back in time and has been done for hundreds of years in many different cultures to document what people are seeing in different parts of the world where they live. It's a simple way to see what's going on and record what's happening in each season. I love this. I think it's a really cool cultural phenomenon, but it's also beautiful. Being aware and taking time to observe the spaces around you is of prime importance to your journey as a gardener and will help you to see what needs to be done and what can wait. It will help you to see what's seasonal, what may be changing, and where there are tasks you need to take care of. It will slow you down and align you back with the pace of nature and the sky, both of which are critically important when you're a gardener. We all need to do this. It is very hard to disconnect and turn off the phone or turn off the radio or the audiobook or the chatter and just breathe and be part of the planet. And gardening is that, if nothing else. Okay, so this is one of my favorite advanced gardening techniques. This is called lasagna gardening. And I actually brought this book here by Patricia Lanza. I love this book. This is one of my go-to tools. And I put the cover of this book in my slide so anyone online can see it as well. Lasagna gardening is built for the best of us who don't like to dig, who don't want to destroy the structure of the soil, who don't want to make gardening harder than it has to be. Lasagna gardening is a perfect way to garden because what you're doing is building gardens from the ground up. You're not tilling, you're not digging down, you're not pulling out rocks or digging up roots or getting stressed or sweating. You're just making beautiful gardens from the ground up. It's an organic gardening method that uses a layering system, and it is a dream come true for beginners and advanced gardeners alike. It has little to no maintenance and no digging required. And really what you're doing is layering from the bottom up, brown to green, and you're building a garden bed that will create organic matter and decompose over time to create beautiful humus for all of the gorgeous organic life in the soil to live through and create lovely space for the roots of your plants to live in. Now, I love to make lasagna garden beds and plant directly into them. You can make them in the fall and let them sit through the winter and cure, and your bed is good to go. If you want to make them fast and grow right into them, you do need to add a nice layer of finished soil on the top so your plants can immediately go into some finished soil, because all of those layers need time to break down from organic material into organic matter. And there is a difference. Organic material breaks down all the way 90% down into that last 10%, which becomes humus and becomes the food for your plants and the food for all the life in your soil. Either way, this is a fantastic method. I'll read the slide with you. You're literally layering materials on the soil, starting with cardboard or newspaper. That is to inhibit any weeds on the bottom. If you're taking out grass, I flip the soil over so that the grass can die and become beautiful soil underneath. Then I put my cardboard or my newspaper and I layer it thick. One layer is no good. I like 3 or 4 or 6, as many as I can find. I make a nice thick layer. Then I add 2 inches of brown material. Brown material is dry leaves and hay and newspaper and sawdust and hair clippings and anything I can find, pine cones. I have my kids scouring the neighborhood for newspapers. Then you want 4 to 8 inches of green materials, and that's grass clippings and food scraps and weeds and cuttings. With the weeds, I cut off the roots. I don't really want those to grow. And if I have big old seed heads, I cut those off too, because I don't want seeds in my pile, because seeds will grow. I'm making gorgeous soil. Of course they're going to grow. And they're little packets of DNA that say grow. So I cut those off. And then I water it, get it nice and moist so that anything in there can start to decompose. And then I do it again. And I layer it up and I layer it up and I make it at least 2 feet tall. Sometimes I make it taller, depending on how much room I have or if I want several beds. I make a nice thick lasagna garden bed. And if you're going to plant into it immediately, you want to add in some bone meal and some blood meal into those layers. And the reason for that is our soil is super depleted. we have very little topsoil compared to 100 years ago. And we need to replenish all of the topsoil that's been stripped away when houses are built, when people rake their leaves away, when they clear away all their lawn clippings. And really, most of our homes around here are lawn, and the lawn has almost no nutrients in it at all. So you need to add in the nutrients that should be there. And really, bone meal and blood meal is animal matter that would be there if there were little carcasses from the animals and the dead animal carcasses from the predators, leaving them there if it was a forest floor or a meadow or a land that was not inhabited by people. And really, our ancestors used to bury their fish carcasses, or they would bury their bones out in the garden, and they would have a pile. Nobody had a dump. Nobody had a garbage truck. So people would put stuff back in the land, and that land would feed them. So if you're going to grow right into it, you need to add back bone meal and blood meal. Neither of those things are going to attract any rodents. They're clean and cooked through, don't worry. And then you need to add in your 8 inches of finished compost. Beautiful, finished, clean compost with clean topsoil. And what I mean by clean, you want to make sure that it comes from a source that does not have persistent herbicides in it. And ask the right questions of your source to make sure that the animals that gave you the manure, that were part of that soil, were not fed persistent herbicides on their straw or hay. Because if there were, then they're in your soil and it's game over. Your seeds are going to be toxified, your soil will be too. Make sure you ask those questions. If you're not going to use it right away, skip the topsoil, skip the bone meal and the blood meal, and let it sit and overwinter. Fall's a perfect time for lasagna gardening and prepping your beds for spring. All right, let's move on. Square foot gardening is an advanced gardening technique. It is used all over the world, and it is a wonderful way to improve soil, again, from the ground up. This is a no-till, no-dig method. This requires that you create your own soil, and the inventor of square foot gardening was Mel Bartholomew in 1975. He initially lectured and created a book all about his technique. And his technique requires that you create 4 foot by 4 foot beds, and then you break out these beds into grids. And within each grid, you put a plant. And on my slide, you can see how he designated each portion of his grid for plant size. So for extra small plants, you can fit a whole lot more plants than the extra large plants. For instance, one extra large plant could fit in a grid spot, and a medium-sized plant, you could put 4 of them into a grid spot in your 4 by 4 garden bed. But this particular method allows for intensive gardening, and it was really designed after the French intensive gardening method so that you could get the very most out of your soil as long as your soil was nutrient rich, which is why he created a soil ingredient list that you must use in order to use his method and have success. And his was 1/3 blended compost, 1/3 vermiculite, which is a mineral, and 1/3 peat moss. Now, I love square foot gardening, and I have used square foot gardening with incredible success. My only problem with it now is that it requires peat moss. Peat moss is now a substance which we're trying to completely ban. It is banned all around the world except for here in the US because it is an unsustainable sourced product, and the peat bogs are not something that we can replace. It takes 1,000 years to replenish a peat bog, and they catch on fire when they source peat out of them. a very sustainable product that can replace the peat moss in this is coconut coir, which is a sustainable product that comes from coconut trees, and coconut trees grow and replenish themselves in 5 to 7 years. And you can get coconut coir at lots of garden centers or online. It lasts in your soil for 3 to 5 years. And peat moss really doesn't do what it is purported to do. It's really great for starting seeds, but it's not great for holding water in a soil mix. So replace peat moss in Mel's recipe with coconut coir and you're good to go. But square foot gardening is great. It also includes the idea of rotating your crops in your beds every year so that your nutrients get replenished, because different crops do different things to the soil. Some of them add nutrients to the soil and some of them take away. So crop rotation is important. Also, he really believes strongly in vertical growing and making sure you put trellises up in his bed so that you get the most bang for your buck. As well as companion planting. So let's go to companion planting now. Companion planting is something that I do full force every time I garden, whether I'm gardening with perennials in my front garden or if I'm using vegetables and flowers and herbs in my vegetable garden. Companion planting is very, very important, and it is a cultivation technique and an advanced gardening skill that relies on the coexistence without the use of pesticides or chemical fertilizers. The North American Permaculture magazine defines companion planting as a type of polyculture where 2 or more plant types are grown together because at least one of them shows improved growth due to the presence of the others. And they've even modified it to include a case where only one plant might receive benefit. There's a lot of anecdotal and suggestive subject matter here, but not a lot of research, but it doesn't really matter. There are actually hundreds of years of gardeners like us who use herbs to protect plants, taller plants to shade smaller plants. And there's a lot of Japanese gardeners who have been using companion planting and have shown that there are root benefits of certain radishes and certain cucurbits that protect one another, which has been really interesting in my research. The concept of using plants to assist each other better to grow, prevent soil erosion, repel insects, and the use of chemical compounds, of one or both to aid each other in a network of nutrients at the root level is what companion planting is all about. And it actually has been around as long as the ancient Roman Empire. Native Americans used companion planting in the Three Sisters gardening style to plant their corn, bean, and squash. Companion planting has long been studied and utilized in Asian farms. And most companion planting has been the result of community knowledge and experience, pairing plants that have clear benefits that can be recreated in different places at different times. So you can see on my slide, companion planting prevents disease. They get rid of antagonistic bacteria using the power of microorganisms at the roots. For example, planting garlic and strawberry together protects both strawberries and garlic, or cucumbers with scallions. Barley and oats suffer powdery mildew, and if you plant cucumbers with wheat, they protect each other, or grapes with oats, they protect each other, which are very interesting companion planting combinations. Also, they repel pests. So if you use plants with defense mechanisms to avoid prey to insects over time through evolution, an insect has developed an ability to neutralize toxins put out by plants to protect themselves in order to avoid being prey. But they aren't all immune to toxins, and some plants elude them. So you can confuse a pest when you grow different types of plants together because they determine what's dangerous to them by color and smell. So odoriferous plants do wonders by protecting your garden. You've probably heard of marigolds protecting plants. And scents and smells and sometimes colors are known to pests to be toxic, so they will just stay away. And you can also use trap crops to lure pests to a particular plant and away from others. There are beneficial plants that help insects and keep. A beneficial is an insect that preys on pests, but is only attracted to certain type of plants. So you can reduce pests by planting what are called banker plants to bring beneficials to the garden to feast on pests. Banker plants are plants that are different from the primary crop being grown. They assist in establishing, supporting, and maintaining a population of biological control agents that are released on the banker plants. For example, a banker plant supports biological control agents with pollen or other plant material. Cereal aphids only reproduce on a certain kind of plant. So if you plant that plant, cereal aphids will come to it, and then they will stay away from all of the cereal grains that you plant if you're a particular kind of a farmer and you're growing cereal grains. So you can plant that banker plant to keep your cereal grains free from these aphids. Banker plants, like the aphid banker plant system, also attract naturally occurring aphid predators such as ladybugs and lacewings and gall midges, especially during the spring, and those are great. These predators are attracted to the aphids even if there are no aphid pests present on other greenhouse crops, which is great because then you have all of these beneficial insects coming in and taking care of other problem pests in your garden or in your greenhouse. Parasitic wasps help farmers and gardeners in naturally controlling crops by killing insects that are harmful to crops. So putting a banker plant into your garden or using something like that banker plant system will really help your garden in other ways. Speeding up growth with the right amount of stress when you use companion planting can give you amazing results. Plants grow taller and the roots of each enhance each other's growth. Plantings put up more flowers and are stronger than monocrops and hold up better when you diversify your plantings. So that's really appropriate and important when you're dealing with companion plants. Accumulator plants are plants that put nitrogen into the soil and help the other plants benefit from the added nitrogen. If you select plants strategically, your plants will grow healthier as one plant uptakes nutrients and another benefits from the changing composition of the soil. Fewer weeds will happen with companion planting because you have no space for weeds. You have lots and lots of plants. For instance, I planted tomatoes in one bed, and in the back of the bed, I planted an eggplant. That was a trap crop because a lot of the pest plants that come after tomatoes love eggplant leaves. So my eggplant has holes all over the leaves, and I let that just be a plant that I was willing to sacrifice. It's called a sacrificial trap crop. I was hoping maybe I would get one eggplant, but my soil is so rich, I've gotten about 10. And in the center between my two tomatoes and my eggplants, I planted wildflowers so that I could bring pollinators and beneficial insects into this part of my garden. And because of that, I have no weeds at all in this bed. I have lots and lots of wildflowers and some extra cutting flowers and lots of beautiful insects and leaf hoppers and all kinds of great things. Efficient use of space, which is the biggest benefit of companion planting. When you have two plants that grow well together, you can plant more. And these are called mutual prosperity plants. That's actually the translation of companion planting in Japanese. It is a perfect way to get better at gardening and become an advanced gardener for urban gardeners. Getting great at companion planting and learning more about it, I think, is the way to become a real master gardener. And I have some special things to share with you. I made these great slides to help you learn about some of the beneficials that go along with our plant families. So, for instance, this is the squash plant family. And our friends for the squash plant family are borage, dill, nasturtium, and sunflower. And the best mulches for the squash plant family are straw and clover. These mulches and these friends of the squash plant family will make squash, corn, and pole beans grow the very best, taller, stronger, with much greater yields. Now, the perennial family, what we call the perennial family, has a lot of plant friends that grow beautifully with this family. The perennial family includes rhubarb, strawberries, asparagus, raspberries, and horseradish. And if you mulch these guys with pine straw for strawberries and asparagus and fine chopped leaves for everybody else, you will have amazing results. I had more strawberries this year from my early strawberries and my midsummer strawberries than we knew what to do with. And my groundhog got plenty of them also. So I'm not a canner, but I'm pretty much going to have to do that and become a canner this next year because I had way more berries and a lot of rhubarb, a lot more than I thought I would have. And I interplant in this plant family borage and sweet alyssum, black-eyed Susans, bee balm, cosmos, dill. I love dill. I put dill everywhere I can. Tansies, yarrow, chives, lovage, asters, and creeping thyme, and bee balm. I put bee balm anywhere I can. So these are two different garden neighborhoods for two different plant families. Here are two other plant families. Our potato plant family includes beans and peas, and their friends are calendula, sweet Annie, daisies, dill, rosemary, and cosmos. They like to be mulched with straw. If you mulch with straw, you're going to get lots and lots of potatoes, beans, and peas. You'll probably get lots of beans anyway, but if you do this right, you're also going to get lots of peas in the spring. Our roots and greens family are your carrots, your greens, and your onions. They love to live together, plant them together. They love cleome. That is that beautiful plant that's also called spider plant, and it pops up and makes lots of babies, so be warned. Chamomile, cosmos, caraway, dill, and fennel. Those are all of its plant families, friends. Now we have two more plant families. We have the tomato family, or the nightshades, with peppers, eggplants, and greens. Greens can live with both families. Their friends are basil, cleome again, parsley, asters, and Queen Anne's lace. And their mulch is clover or black plastic. There we go with the black plastic. And last is the cabbage family, where we have the lettuces and the root crops. And their best mulch is dwarf white clover and sweet alyssum. Their plant family friends are calendula, asters, chamomile, cosmos, marigolds, rosemary, chrysanthemums, sage, and thyme. I've worked hard on learning all of this and memorizing and making a lot of mistakes and figuring out what helps things grow better. But this will all be on the YouTube channel, so you can go back and stop and pause and take notes if you're not taking notes today. Companion planting works, and it helps when we grow things for the advantages of each crop. The shade that corn or sunflowers provide midsummer allow a second crop of cool season lettuces. Likewise, the short crops provide ground cover for the mid-sized crops and help with the living mulch around other plants. This chart lists some tall, mid-size, and short crops in no particular order or relationship. Use this with other companion planting knowledge to pair heights for benefit. Ginger grows wonderfully in the shade of taro and has a symbiotic relationship in the soil, improving the quality of both. Taro is a tall crop and ginger is a short crop, just as examples. Eggplant is a mid-sized crop and pairs well with peanuts, both of which grow here really well for an efficient use of space and are mutually non-interfering in the soil. Another example is root systems. Deep-rooted spinach and shallow-rooted onions mix well together and they don't compete, and the onions are protecting of your spinach. So if you plant spinach and it winds up super holy with lots of insects loving all over it, try planting onions with it and see what happens. Because I was suffering my spinach and swearing it off forever until I learned this trick. And now I grow spinach very happily in my garden. Integrated pest management is a way to use companion planting and making sure that you understand how to attract beneficials to get rid of insects that cause damage in your garden. I want to show you a picture actually of one of my sacrificial trap crop eggplants. Do you see all the holes in the leaves here? Those are all the insect damage. And you can see some of my beautiful sun gold orange tomatoes hiding behind there that are perfectly happy and nothing at all damaged them. I had way more than I could ever eat. And all of my neighbors did too. And we donated some to Shim. This was last year's. Some evidence suggests that pests like the Colorado beetle and the eggplant flea beetle prefer this type of long skinny eggplant. So they go and eat on it and won't bother other plants nearby. So I like this long skinny Japanese eggplant and I plant it anywhere I can as long as it's within its companion family and it is benefiting the other plants properly. As with other variation of gardening styles, there's different approaches to utilizing trap cropping. You can plant trap crops at the borders to attract beneficials and attract pests to them and then remove them. You could take an eggplant like this and say, oh, it's ugly. Look at all these pests we've gotten with it and pull it right out. Or you can leave it there. You can interplant these kinds of trap crops to keep pests away from your desired crops, or you can leave them in place as a sacrificial plant like I have. You can intercrop too. For example, you can plant a row of lovage and then a row of tomatoes and repeat, and you will attract the hornworms to the lovage and not to your tomatoes. So that's really useful and good to know. I've learned very, very much from my books and from my library and from practice and from neighbors and friends. I highly suggest diving into books. They are your friends. There are many other plants that act as trap crops. This chart is great. If you have slugs, chevrils, a great way to attract them and get them out of your garden. Same thing with marigolds. And marigolds also attract thrips and nematodes. Zinnias are great for attracting Japanese beetles, and nettles attract aphids, and then also your ladies are great because they eat the aphids. Awesome. Again, hornworms will go to lovage and dill, and thrips will protect garlic by going to basil, and cabbage worm and diamondback moths will go to collards. Cucumber is protected by the amaranth getting eaten by the cucumber beetle. And squash is protected when squash bugs eat millet. Carrots are protected when the carrot root fly and thrips eat on onion and garlic. And actually, they don't even eat on them. They just don't like the smell. They fly away, which is great because then you have lots of onion and garlic and everyone needs more of that. And pepper is protected again by eggplant. Eggplant is a wonderful trap crop for so many things. Companion planting is amazing, but it is not enough alone. None of this is enough alone when you're doing organic gardening. You have to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You need to build up diversity in your garden. Monocrops do not exist in nature. Enrich your soil to prevent the overwhelm of weed seeds sprouting up and taking over. Make space for your beneficials, create shelter, swear off your pesticides. They are doing more harm than good. Plant flowers and herbs alongside and throughout. Identify native species that are weeds and let them stay and help your pollinators. Now, if we're going to talk a little bit about our integrated pest management, that's really important. You need to know your plants, start paying attention, slow down, take notes, keep a journal or a log of the plants in your garden, and then start to know your pests. Figure out what's going on in your garden. Who's visiting you? Who's visiting your plants? And learn your beneficial insects and learn what the different stages of their life look like. This picture at the bottom are 3 stages of just ladybugs. Those are all good guys. One good guy in 3 different stages of its life. Don't kill them. Don't swat them. We need them. They're great for our gardens and for our world. Manage your weeds. Hand pull and mulch with green living mulch as well as hardwood mulches. More green mulches than hardwood mulches. Chopping up trees to make mulch is not the best choice. Try with green mulches as much as you can. And scout for pests. Use traps. Use trap crops and hand remove those bugs if you can. And prevent to limit damage. Don't go after the damage and then be upset. That's really a harder way to garden. Being upset is not a fun way to garden. Now let's talk just a minute about this wonderful advanced gardening technique called straw bale gardening. I fully believe that gardening should be easy and joyful, and I don't think anyone should garden and be upset about it or unhappy or dissatisfied with what's happening in their garden. It's all about perspective and attitude. Straw bale gardening allows you to garden with joy and ease because A, straw bales give you instant raised beds and instant containers for your vegetables or your crops or your flowers or whatever you want to grow. You can really grow anything in a straw bale. You don't have any weed seeds in a straw bale because you're not dealing with soil in the ground that might have some latent seeds that a bird dropped or latent seeds from some weeds that you pulled once. You just have your beautiful straw bale with some fresh seed mix in the top that you put in, you let it cure for a couple of weeks, and then you put your plants in, and voila, you have a garden. This is really fun. It's fun to do with a neighbor, a companion, a child, and you can have amazing and beautiful gardens with straw bales. Also, you have instant neutral pH. You don't have to do extensive soil corrections, which you almost always have to do with soil in the ground, especially soil that's had toxins in it or soil that's super acidic or alkaline. And really anything grows, anything with roots. Straw bale gardening is wonderful. Once the straw inside the bale begins to decay and the straw becomes conditioned compost, it really creates extraordinary plant root environments. Straw bale allows anyone, even someone with the worst soil, to grow a terrific garden. You can do straw bale gardening on a roof because you automatically have a garden. It's great. The only hard and fast rules for straw bale, and there are a couple: don't plant corn. The roots are huge, and even the biggest bale would only have room for a few stalks, and they will fall over and you will be unhappy. Don't be unhappy. Other perennial root vegetables, asparagus and rhubarb, they are perennials. Straw bales decay and erode faster than those vegetables need to become established. Don't grow them in straw bales. I think that's basically it. I mean, straw bales are simple and they're easy and they're a great way to get plants and natives and vegetables and fruits. Oh, don't plant trees in straw bales. That's not a good idea either. Permaculture. This is a whole huge topic. I think I mentioned that at the beginning. This is something worth investing your time in if you like learning and you like growing your knowledge about gardening and you want to be a master gardener on the knowledge front and you want to teach others about how to improve the universe. Permaculture is it. Permaculture is a word actually coined by Bill Mollison, and it is the conscious design and maintenance of agriculturally productive ecosystems, which have diversity and stability and resilience of natural ecosystems. It's the harmonious integration of landscape and people, providing their food, energy, shelter, and other material and non-material needs in a sustainable way. It's a really big idea and a really big philosophy, and it's being put into practice all around the world to increase efficiency, to make people aware of what's going on around them, to help people grow food and save water, create housing, and find peace within their communities and themselves. It's really very cool. Let me show you a couple of parts of permaculture. One is food forests. People are planting food forests in their backyards, layered ecosystems, so that they don't have a lawn and a tree and a bush. They have these amazing recreations of ecosystems that are planned ecosystems in order to serve humans and our needs, but also serve the planet, trap carbon, trap rainwater, create elaborate root systems that help with erosion. They're amazing. This permaculture technique, this one specifically, was created by the father of forest gardening, Masanobu Fukuoka, and it's a system of planting that maximizes space and uses land topography, natural or created, to assist with layering plants the way that they're found in nature. Fukuoka, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, his method entailed minimal human interference in the agricultural process, instead creating conditions in which natural processes, left to their own accord, maximize crop outputs. Rather than to solve the problems of agricultural by adding work, he would attempt to do less. So it's very interesting how we design a system that allows nature to do the work that it is supposed to be doing and can do and does divinely, but in a way that can help us and help herself. So for here, you can see that there are 7 layers in this forest garden: a canopy layer, which is a large fruit and nut tree, a lower tree layer with dwarf fruit trees, a shrub layer with currants and berries, a herbaceous layer, a rhizosphere with root crops, the soil surface with ground cover crops, and a vertical layer with climbers and vines. If you were in my last class, this is an awful lot like what I'm asking people to imagine for their own gardens and spaces as people are rebuilding ecosystems and helping our planet and helping our communities with natives is very similar. And you can actually see 2 different food forests in these pictures of communities that I belong to, of people's actual food forests in progress. Another permaculture technique that I adore is called hugelkultur. Hugelkultur is a coined term by Hermann Andra in 1962, but it's actually a popularized technique by Sepp Holzer. Hugelkultur really means buried wood under a mound. And it goes way back for thousands of years in different parts of the world, in Cameroon and China, Eastern Europe and Germany, to name a few. The idea is that you're mounding and burying wood, which allows the moisture of the wood to hydrate crops that are planted on the mound while also providing micronutrients and fungal colonies in the soil that will become created as the wood starts to decompose and becomes very sponge-like as it becomes soil over time. The technique is such that the garden layers of soil and rotting wood and other organic matter form in the mound, and you're taking that rotting wood and let it compost in place for a super fertile, moisture retaining garden bed. These mounds can be 5 or 6 feet high, massive heaps of logs and branches and leaves and straw, grass clippings and manure or compost, and they're much wider at the bottom than at the top. And as the wood shrinks down, the hugelkultur bed sinks, and it ultimately becomes about a 2-foot high bed after several years of decomposition. And it's also very simple. At the base, there are logs and branches and wood chips and sawdust. And then there's sod that's grass side down on top of it. And then leaves and grass clippings and straw, and then manure and compost and leaves, and then topsoil and aged compost. And then you let it rest for months because it's hot. If you were to plant inside it, you would burn the roots of your baby plants and they would all die because you're basically planting into a hot compost heap. And that's not a good idea. You never want to do that. But for the first year, there's a ton of moisture inside this hugelkultur bed. And there will be more and more in the second year and the third and the fourth year as that wood decomposes and becomes large sponges. And those large sponges will hold water from the rain and also just from their natural water retention properties. But the top layer gets dry, especially way up at the top. So if you work in vermiculite and coconut coir into that top layer of soil, that top layer doesn't dry out. So anything that's more interested in more water, any crops that you love to plant or flowers that you love that enjoy more water, you want to plant on the lower parts of the mound, or trees, shrubs, or any plants that like more water, things that would grow in a bog or I'm thinking about like swamp milkweed or a button bush, things that like wet conditions do better on the lower part of the hill. And then you want things that like better drainage on the top of the hill where there actually is better drainage in the beginning. But these things do great, and they have been shown to do wonderful things for the soil and to help with all kinds of problems with drought and with erosion all around the world. And they produce tons of food if you plant food into them. If you look up hugelkultur online, you will see people who purport to have hundreds of pounds of crops from 1 year of planting in these beds and have no idea what to do with them because the soil and the moisture retention in the soil is phenomenal. And the nutrients and the micronutrients coming out of the wood are so much more than just soil alone, which are pretty amazing. I actually had hugelkultur beds in Connecticut, and unfortunately we moved before I got all of the wonder out of them. But my husband was grateful that I stopped making them. Yes. So biodynamic gardening is very interesting, and I wanted to add this in because I think it is important to add. It is a pseudoscientific concept initially developed by Rudolf Steiner and was one of the first organic farming movements ever created. It uses reliance on esoteric knowledge and mystical beliefs, but biodynamic techniques are in use in over 55 countries and is practiced on over 5,000 farms globally. People who practice biodynamic gardening use star charts, and a lot of people garden by the moon and use a lot of understanding of the whole system and harmony. And what I love about biodynamic gardening is it really did bring people to the land and started to get people aware of ecology when ecology wasn't a thing yet. And people were not aware of human connection to the land and our connection to our food and our food's connection to the whole ecosystem. So that's really important. Also, biodynamic gardening has a very strong importance on compost and bringing compost back into the soil, which was not a thing at all when Steiner came into this idea and started sharing it. Biodynamic gardening is used a lot to teach children about gardening and is married with Waldorf schooling. So a lot of children start to learn about the earth and ecosystems and harmony with nature with biodynamic gardening, and that's a wonderful idea. So I wanted to just mention this. I think it's a great idea. There is some questions about whether or not burying crystals in your compost does anything and has any value scientifically, but composting has a lot of value. So whether or not your compost has mineral components that are added in ceremonies, we don't know. But we do know compost is amazing. And we do know that bringing awareness is amazing. Keeping your food scraps from your home to your land is very important. And understanding seasons is amazing. There's probably a lot to the moon cycle and the movement of the stars and the way that our land and our earth responds to it. We just don't have the scientific evidence to back it up at this point. Now, this guy is one of my favorite guys. And I'm reading his book right now. It's over there on my table. It's called The One Straw Revolution. This is Fukuoka, that I mispronounce his name all the time. He is a wonderful Japanese philosopher. According to his account in The One Straw Revolution, that book, his journey to natural farming began with a philosophical realization. He was a successful agricultural researcher for several years, and he found himself one morning struck by the realization that all human knowledge is empty, and human action is meaningless, and nothingness is the fundamental nature of reality. And that's pretty amazing. With this basic existential insight, he began to approach life's problems with a fundamentally different attitude. He decided to resist the futile human urge to impose being onto nothingness and structure onto formlessness. Rather than attempting to solve problems through actions, new interventions to fix things, he began to adopt a more subtractive approach. So instead of action, he would experiment with inaction. And he began his philosophy of farming based around this negative Taoist disposition. And rather than solve problems of agriculture by adding work, he decided to do less. And it worked. So instead of working and working and working and working and working to have more yields, he sat back and watched and figured out that doing less actually yielded more, and that the earth was doing her own work and solving the problems herself. And that is amazing. So I actually love this idea because this is right in line with being an advanced gardener, with observing and watching and learning and starting to listen more. and being more connected. I love the idea of paying attention and starting to see things and saying, oh, now I can see it's time to weed, instead of compulsively weeding all the time and being frustrated and, oh, my garden has all these weeds. Maybe if we only weed when they first begin, then we have no weeds for the rest of the season. And there's harmony and joy in our garden. I think his do less approach is exactly what all of us need as we become masters in gardening and as we become more settled in life, especially in these crazy times. I think he's amazing. I think his book, The One Straw Revolution, is worth a read for anyone who wants a little bit of freedom in their gardening and in their life. So I firmly believe in the do no evil urban gardening approach. I bring this slide with my little daughter who is here tonight to each of my programs to try to instill in everyone I teach sustainability in gardening today and for the next 20 to 30 years, and however many years we have left in our gardening careers. I want to help you attempt to enhance your garden, your soil, and your ecosystem, support, preserve, keep alive, maintain, reinforce, and nourish yourself and your space. Have good environmental stewardship, make educated decisions about what you buy, support sustainable and responsible products and practices as much as possible, and ask questions of your local gardening professionals and industry to demand activism. If you don't ask, they don't know what we want. They can't make changes unless they know. Today we covered all of these topics, many, many topics in advanced gardening. I hope you learned something. Thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I am happy to help you. I'm sorry, traffic was a little intense getting here today. Anyone? Okay, thank you for coming.